After many weeks of work, I finally started another level of my platformer game, and personally, I think it looks quite nice so far. But with a clean slate also comes a unique opportunity to analyze how I did on the previous level and to see if there's anything I would do differently this time around. Unfortunately, I soon realized that I would need to make many more changes than I initially thought. For reference, this is the new level I call the Center of Misery. It follows the asbestos mine, which is the most complete level so far. In this game, you descend into the earth and encounter increasingly strange environments, hence why we go from a pretty standard mine level to essentially a hellscape. When looking at the asbestos mine, there were a few key problems I noticed. First, that the enemies were often boring, easy, or didn't fit with the level layout. Second, that the level layout seemed kind of disorganized and disconnected. And third, that the visuals seemed off in some way. Analyzing these problems was kind of demotivating in a way, but it was helped by the fact that recognizing these problems is the first step to making a better game. I already had the theme of the new level in mind, so my strategy was basically just to get to work and address the problems as they were relevant. Like usual, I decided to start with the visuals. Having unique settings is one of the key goals of my game, so this is quite important. I first added some tiles for this indoor brick area and outdoor ash area. I didn't do anything special, but I did implement what I learned previously. You can see that the tiles get darker as you go into the background, and there are many details to break up repeating patterns. When I finished drawing tiles and looked at the whole scene, I honestly thought it looked pretty good. I didn't expect it, but I noticed a clear improvement over the previous level, which reassured me that even when I make mistakes, I'm still improving over time. Much the same happened with the background, except I clearly knew what went wrong in the previous level. The background was able to move up and down, which made it more difficult to layer backgrounds since the ground wouldn't always be on the ground. The simple solution is just to remove the vertical scrolling. You can see here I jump up and down, but the backgrounds don't move. This allows me to layer as many backgrounds as I want to produce this nice parallax effect that adds more depth. I also added these lights made out of hearts on pikes. Now they might seem gross, but they're thematically appropriate and add more movement to the environment. The next thing I added was the enemies. Every enemy takes a lot of work, so I wanted to plan in advance how I'd make them actually interesting. I thought about which enemies were the best in the previous level, and I came to the conclusion that those were the enemies who attacked using complex projectile patterns or movement. I wasn't sure why it was those enemies because it seemed so oddly specific, but eventually I realized how obvious the answer was. Obstacles that challenge the player on their movement are inherently more interesting in a game focused on movement. I'm really disappointed that I didn't figure that out earlier, but even when it hadn't initially crossed my mind, the attempt of finishing a level proved to be an invaluable learning experience. So how did I implement that knowledge in the new enemies? Well, the first one is the eye stalk. It sits still while shooting projectiles at you. The pattern is simple but can be very challenging in groups. The second one is the ghost, which slowly approaches you. It can be difficult to deal with in very tight spaces. I would say both of these enemies fit the game quite well, but there's also another technique I used to make them better. I made them larger. Compared to the old enemies, these new enemies have much larger hitboxes, which reduces the need for precise attacks and increases the need for precise movements, once again playing into the strengths of the gameplay. So yeah, I'm definitely happy with my progress on the enemies. As for the level layout, I would actually say I was on the right track before, focusing on a small set of enemies and developing their ideas throughout the level. I think the main problem I had was how arbitrarily strict I was with the enemy placement, saying certain areas should have only certain enemies and no others. This probably explains why the level felt very disconnected, since each area is completely different from the others. This also has the problem of making the gameplay within these areas too predictable, since it's the same obstacle over and over. I haven't worked on much of the layout for the new level, but moving forward I'll probably take a more human-oriented perspective, thinking actively about how to progress the level in a way that's interesting for the player, rather than adhering to some specific standard. Finally, I think I have a good plan to make this new level much better than the previous. But there was still one feature I've been wanting to rework for a while that would improve the quality of the game even more: the camera. In the past it just followed the player, which often obscured important objects in all directions. Many of you have suggested ways to make it better, which I'm really grateful for, but I haven't been able to make those changes previously for a couple of reasons. Firstly, the camera might need to move differently depending on where you are in the level, and I wasn't sure what features were needed or how to transition between them. Secondly, the awful way I implemented the camera made it very confusing to change its behavior, so I would essentially have to rewrite the camera's movement code. Well, I finally got around to rewriting the camera's movement code. The new system I came up with modifies the camera's position in 4 ways. First, by tracking an object, such as the player. Second, by offsetting the camera a certain distance, like by moving a bit forward in the direction the player is looking. Third, by locking the camera to a specific X or Y coordinate if the camera is in a specific region. And fourth, by shaking the camera when anything happens that would cause it to shake. All of the values produced in these ways are completely independent from each other and are added together to produce the final camera position. This means that the camera can adapt to the player's needs while allowing smooth movements for each mode. Notice how in a flat area the camera doesn't move vertically, but once the terrain becomes more bumpy, it gradually follows the player more. Once you get to a more flat area, the camera locks again, all completely seamlessly. You can even combine a horizontal lock with a vertical lock to hold the camera in a single position. This new system is very versatile, and is also easy to modify if I want to add new features later. There's also one final thing I did to tie up some loose ends. I added attack animations and crouching animations. They were fairly easy to make, but did require a bit more technical work than previous animations. To make sure the attack looked good during any state, I split all animations into 2 parts, the lower part and the upper part. Whenever you attack, the upper part is replaced with the corresponding attack animation, allowing the legs to still move according to the current action. This makes for a good proof of concept for the final design, which I'll hold off on trying to complete until I get better at drawing and animation. Overall, I'm making steady progress, like usual, but more importantly, I'm improving, even compared to 1 month ago. Which is really good because it means that even as I'm not incredibly knowledgeable, causing me to make obvious mistakes, I can learn from those mistakes and gradually improve over time. That's all for now, and if you'd like to keep up with future devlogs, please consider subscribing. Thank you. Bye.